Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about the circumference and area of a circle. So a circle is actually a really important shape in not only geometry but in our human history because of the wheel and how we could finally, transport items from one location to the other, especially if they're heavy items, and transport items also like people so that we could travel. Um, Circle is also an important shape for currency because that allowed people to, buy and sell things with each other and just carry it in a convenient way. Although I guess now the important shape is probably a rectangle like a credit card, but nevertheless, the circle is very important. So let's look now at the particular parts of the circle. Okay, so a circle, it is closed in its shape and it doesn't have any sharp edges. It is round. It does have a center. That is the first mathematical term you need to know, kind of like the origin on your coordinate plane. And it has a radius. The radius goes from the center of the circle to any point on its edge. Okay, so far, center and radius should be in your notebook. Radius, you should definitely write down because people often get radius and diameter confused. So, radius is the distance from the center of the circle to any point on its edge. People like to think about an actual wheel for radius because the spokes on a wheel or on your bicycle wheel or anything like that is they're basically your radii. RADII is the plural for radius. Okay? And double that is the diameter. So the diameter is going to go from one edge of the circle through the center to another edge. Important that it goes through the center because if you just go from one edge of the circle to another edge, that's not the diameter. Okay? That's actually shorter. This technically could be going from one edge to the other, right? So the diameter actually cuts your circle in half. Okay, so center, radius, halfway, just from center to the edge, and then diameter, all the way across through the center. So like we said, diameter is the distance across the center through across the circle through the center. So therefore, like we said, the diameter is 2 times the radius. It's double that. So make sure that that goes in your notes. It is the largest distance between any 2 points on the circle because like we said, you can cut your circle multiple ways, but the diameter is going to be the largest distance. Okay? And circumference is just a fancy way of saying perimeter. And you know that a perimeter is the distance around the edge, right? So the perimeter of a rectangle, a 4x5 rectangle, would just be adding up all the different sides. 4 plus 4 plus 5 plus 5, going all the way around the edge. 1, 2, 3, 4, adding up all those sides. I like to think of action movies where they, are about to check out a building and they say, you got to, secure the perimeter, right? So that just means that somebody is going to go around the edge of the building and check things out and see if there's anything dangerous. That's how I like to remember perimeter. Circumference, like we said, is just a fancy way of saying perimeter for a circle. People never say perimeter for a circle. I don't know why. Circles are so special. They have their own word as well for perimeter, but it's basically the same. Okay? Okay, let's take a look at some formulas. How do we actually calculate this stuff? To find circumference of a circle, or also the perimeter, we can take pi and multiply that by the diameter. They wrote it as pi d because that's the symbol for pi, and d stands for diameter. And then we know since diameter equals 2 times the radius, because the diameter is all the way across and the radius is only halfway across, we could also calculate it by taking pi and multiplying by radius and then multiplying by 2. Okay, because sometimes the problem gives you the radius but not the diameter. You just have to know that it's half of it, so you still got to multiply by 2. The area of a circle is pi r squared. So that's pi times the radius, and since that's squared, that means we're going to times the radius again. Okay? So it's all just one big multiplication problem. Now, sometimes you'll see people use 3.14 or 22/7 for pi, and both of these are an approximation of pi because, as we know, pi is an irrational number that goes on and on and on, right? 3.145, whatever. So just know that if you're using this approximation, 3.14 or 22/7, it's actually going to be not as accurate, okay? So pi by itself is this huge number. So of course, if you just use the first 3 digits, it's going to be a little off, right? And 22/7 is also an approximation. It's supposed to be 3.145, I think 7, right? 59. So the reason why people actually use the fraction 22/7 is because sometimes they're dealing with fractions. It's just easier to have a numerator and a denominator rather than decimals. Okay, so it just depends on the situation. And then just a fun fact, with our computers, pi can actually be calculated to over 1 trillion digits past the decimal point. But nobody needs to be that accurate anyways. It's just like a fun exercise. Okay. All right, let's make sure that you have those formulas in your notebook, and then let us get started with some problems. Okay, for example 3, it says the diameter of a circle is 14 centimeters. Find its circumference and area by taking A, pi as 3.14, B, pi as 22/7, and C, the value of pi in your calculator, giving your answer correct to 2 decimal places. Go ahead and pause the video and try it on your own first. All right, I'm going to first start off by writing out my formulas. So the circumference and the area we both need. They gave us diameter. So for circumference, I just need to do pi times d, the diameter, and for area, it's pi r squared, right? So I'm going to need the radius. So let me just go ahead and write down that the diameter is 14 centimeters. So the radius is half, so it's going to be 7 centimeters. I just want to write that on the side so I don't use the wrong value later. Okay, A says to calculate both of those using 3.14. So the circumference will be pi, or 3.14, times my diameter, which is 14. And then my area would be 3.14 times radius, 7, times another radius, because it's radius squared. Okay, and then at the end, it's going to be whatever that answer is. Let me go ahead and put my centimeters in there because that's going to affect my units later. And you'll see why. Okay, so let me take out my calculator. 3.14 times 14 is 43.96 centimeters. And that's my answer. Okay. For the area, it's 3.14 times 7 times 7. So that's 153.86. 153.86 centimeters times centimeters So it should be centimeters squared. So important to not forget about your correct units. Area is two-dimensional, right? So it needs to have 2 for the power. Okay, let's go ahead and do the next part. B. B wants us to use 22/7. I'm secretly dreading this because I don't want to have to deal with fractions. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. Ooh, this one might be good because I have 14 and 7. I'm going to put it as a fraction. Centimeters for area, 22/7 times 7/1 centimeters times 7/1 centimeters. Okay, this is not bad because 7 and 14 are divisible, so I don't hate it. All right, so 7 goes into 14 2 times. These 7s can cancel, so that's awesome. All right, not too bad. Let's go back then and do this math. 22 times 2 now is 44 centimeters. And then these two 7s cancel, so it's 22 times 7. 22 times 7, 154. 154 centimeters squared. Okay, so notice how they're a little off from each other, right? Because they're both approximations, but they're close to each other. 43.96 is close to 44. 153.86 is close to 154. Now the last one, they want us to actually use the correct, accurate version of pi. So circumference equals, we'll just put the diameter, which was 14 pi. And then just make sure there's centimeters at the end. For area, it is 7 times 7 times pi, centimeters squared at the end. Okay, 14 times pi. Put that in my calculator. Pi times 14. Sometimes you might have to do the pi first and then multiply the other number, depending on your calculator. Okay, it's this. They said to give your answer correct to 2 decimal places. 43.98 centimeters. Whoops. Okay, and the next one is pi times 7 times 7. So pi times 49. 153.9. This is an 8, so bump that up to a 4. 153.94. Centimeters squared. Okay, so remember this last one is the accurate one. And then, yeah, they're pretty close to each other, right? It kind of depends on what you're actually doing, on how accurate you actually want it to be. So that's why there's these 3 different ways of using pi. And like I said, for the fraction one, it actually was really awesome because I could essentially do that math in my head. And that was only because they were divisible by 7. Sometimes that's not going to happen for you. Okay, let's move on to example 4. The circumference of a circle is 6 pi centimeters. Wow, that's the most accurate way of writing it. Like just 6 pi. I haven't even put it in my calculator. I don't have to do any rounding. That's the most accurate, is just to keep the pi symbol there. Find the radius of the circle. Find the area of the circle, leaving your answers in terms of pi. So they're like, don't even touch pi, just leave it like that. And C, find the radius of the circle whose area is half of the given circle. And then give your answer correct to 2 decimal places. Okay, pause the video and try it on your own first. All right, so the circumference, let's write down the circumference's formula. Circumference is pi times d, or 2 pi r, right? So if they want to find the radius of the circle, I actually want to use that first, or the second formula, because it already has r in the formula. Okay, so circumference is 6 pi. So instead of C, the circumference. I'm going to write 6 pi. 6 pi equals 2 pi r. They want to know the radius. Well, if the radius is half of the diameter, and it's the diameter times the pi, then radius would equal half of that, which is 3. The other way you can figure that out is you can just cancel out stuff that they have in common. Okay, so pi and pi cancel out on both sides, and then you end up with 6 equals 2r. What has to multiply by 2 to get to 6? Or divide by 2 both sides, whatever works for you. Pi would have to equal 3. Or sorry, radius. I wrote down the wrong variable. Radius would have to equal to 3. So whatever way that makes the most sense to you. Okay, so the radius of this circle is 3. Because clearly the diameter was 6, so the radius had to be half. All right, now part B, the area of the circle, leaving your answer in terms of pi. Okay, area is pi r squared, right? So that's, they said to leave it as pi, radius times radius. Our radius was 3, so 3 times 3 pi, which is 9 pi. Centimeters, because they have centimeters here. Okay, that wasn't bad. Just follow the formula. And then C, the radius of a circle whose area is half that of the given circle. Okay, so if this is the full area, 9 pi, then to find half of that circle, it would be, I'm just going to draw that, it would be 9 pi divided by 2, right? That's half of the area. But we need to figure out the radius. So if this is the area, and area is equal to pi r squared, we need to figure out, let me get rid of, they both have pi on both sides. The radius squared would have to equal 9 halves. We need a number that multiplies by itself to get to 9 halves. Well, we could square root both sides, right? If squared is 9 halves, then square root it to get down to its base. And then we need to find that correct 2 decimal places. So I'll need a calculator for this because this answer is going to be messy. 9 over 2 is 4.5. I need to square root that. So it's this, 2.12 blah, 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 2 decimal places. So 2.12. Okay, 2.12 centimeters. They wanted half of that area, so we divided by 2. And then since radius is squared to get to 9 halves, we had to do the opposite of squaring something, which is square rooting something to get 2.12, right? Because let's say, for instance, 7 times 7 is squaring something to get to 49. Your calculator can use the square root button to bring it back to 7. So we needed that number that multiplies by itself to get to the 9 halves, or 4.5. 2.12 will get us the closest to it. Kind of close to 4.5, okay, because we rounded.